Welcome, weary traveller. Let your shoulders soften, let your breathing slow, and let the weight of this long day melt gently into the cushions beneath you. Tonight we shall journey somewhere quiet, somewhere untouched by the hurry of modern hours. Close your eyes if you wish, or let them grow heavy on their own, and allow my voice to carry you across the rolling hills of 19th-century Pennsylvania, where the air smells faintly of wood smoke, sweet clover, and freshly turned earth. Imagine a narrow dirt lane lined with weathered split-rail fences, the wood silvered by countless seasons of patient sun and gentle rain. Beyond those fences, the fields stretch outward in soft patchwork quilts of green and gold, swaying lazily under a breeze that carries the distant lowing of cattle and the muffled clop of a horse somewhere far across the meadow. There is no rush here. There are no engines, no sirens, no glowing screens, only the quiet hum of a world that moves at the speed of growing things. You are entirely safe here. Nothing will startle you. Nothing will demand anything of you. You are simply a gentle visitor, drifting on the warm currents of memory and imagination, slipping softly into a forgotten Pennsylvania morning, where the sun rises slowly behind a row of sycamores, and the soft creak of a wooden gate, swinging open just for you, invites you inward, deeper, into the slow, sleepy rhythm of an Amish farm, waking gently into another timeless day. Before we drift further down this gentle path, before the dewdrops on the meadow grass fully evaporate beneath the morning sun, allow me to share one quiet wish, whispered as softly as a breeze through tall summer wheat. If the cadence of this voice is bringing you peace, if the tapestry of these words is loosening the tightness in your chest, consider tapping that small subscribe button, gently, almost absent-mindedly, the way one might place a smooth river stone upon a windowsill. Each subscription is like the lighting of a single oil lamp in a long farmhouse hallway, a tiny golden flame that helps these stories continue to flicker into being, week after slumbering week. There is no urgency, no pressure, only an invitation extended with the warmth a farmer's wife might extend a steaming mug of chamomile to a weary neighbor at the kitchen door. If a friend or loved one is also struggling to find rest tonight, perhaps share this little lantern of a story with them as well, so that they too may follow these soft footprints across the Pennsylvania countryside. Leave a comment, even just a single word, and tell us where you are listening from. Your gentle whisper joining a quiet community of dreamers gathered around this hearth of murmured history. And now, with that small kindness offered, let us continue our slow, sleepy walk along the wagon-rutted lane, where the morning mist still clings to the rim of the apple orchard, patient and waiting. The lane curves gently now, bending around a low stone wall that has stood patient and unhurried for perhaps 3 generations. The stones themselves are a quiet symphony of muted colors, a soft palette gathered from the surrounding fields by hands long since returned to the earth. There are stones the color of weak tea, stones the color of pale ash, stones streaked with veins of rust where iron has bled slowly through limestone over the patient passage of decades. Moss has settled into the crevices between them, a velvety green that deepens to emerald in the shaded northern hollows and lightens to a sun-bleached sage where the southern face of the wall catches the warm summer light. Tiny ferns, no larger than a child's fingernail, have rooted themselves in the smallest pockets of soil, their fronds uncurling like delicate green question marks, asking nothing, expecting nothing, simply being. Beyond the wall, the path widens into a soft beaten track of pale yellow dust, powdered fine by countless wagon wheels and the slow plodding of barefoot children carrying tin pails of milk to the springhouse. The dust holds the shape of the morning's first footsteps, a lattice of soft impressions left by leather work boots, by the cloven prints of an unhurried calf wandering loose for a brief, delicious moment, before being gently shooed back toward the pasture. The air here smells of warm earth, the sweet green breath of growing alfalfa, and somewhere, faint but unmistakable, the comforting tang of wood smoke rising from a kitchen chimney that has been burning, in one form or another, since before the War of 1812. Ahead, framed by 2 enormous black walnut trees whose canopies meet in a cathedral arch above the lane, the farmstead reveals itself with the gentle modesty of a thing that has never sought attention. The main house is a long two-story structure of whitewashed limestone and timber, its proportions modest, its lines unembellished, its roof a sweeping plain of dark cedar shingles weathered to a soft pewter grey by the long parade of Pennsylvania winters. There are no shutters in fanciful colours, no decorative trim, no curling ironwork upon the gables. The beauty of the house lies entirely in its honesty, in the way each beam, each pane of wavy hand-blown glass, each plain wooden door, exists for a reason and a reason alone. The whitewash itself is a thing of soft poetry. It has been applied in many gentle layers across many gentle decades, each new coat brushed on with patient strokes during the calm weeks of late spring, when the whole community gathers in turn to refresh one another's homes. The lime in the wash has settled into the porous stone, lending the walls a quality of light that seems almost to glow from within during the long blue twilights of summer. In the morning sun, the whitewash is the colour of fresh cream poured into a hand-thrown pottery bowl. By midday it will brighten to the colour of the inner petals of a wild daisy, and by the soft fall of dusk it will drink in the lavender hues of the western sky and hold them dreamlike until the stars emerge. To the right of the main house stands the great Pennsylvania bank barn, a structure of such honest grandeur that it almost makes the breath catch in quiet wonder. Built into the gentle slope of a small hill, the barn presents two distinct faces to the world. The lower level, the stone foundation where the cattle and horses are stabled, is constructed of field stones laid in patient courses, its small windows framed by hand-hewn timber lintels darkened by a century of patient weather. The upper level, the great threshing floor and haymow, rises in towering walls of vertical pine boards, each plank cut from trees that grew within sight of where they now stand, each board nailed in place with iron nails forged by the village blacksmith 2 generations ago. The barn's roof, broad and protective, sweeps down over a forebay that overhangs the lower wall, creating a sheltered porch where the milk cows gather on rainy mornings, their breath rising in soft clouds. The colours of the barn deserve their own quiet hymn. The pine siding has weathered to a deep, rich brown, the colour of strong coffee or the inside of a chestnut burr, where the rains have run most heavily down the western face. The wood has taken on streaks of silver and dove grey. Lichens, tiny and patient, have colonized the most sheltered corners, painting them in soft circles of pale green and dusty yellow. A single faded heart, hex-painted by some long-departed visitor's well-meaning hand and never quite scrubbed away, ghosts beneath the eaves, its red now barely a whisper of pink upon the dark wood. The Amish themselves do not paint such symbols considering them ornamental excess, but the heart was painted long ago by a non-Amish neighbour as a gift, and the family, too kind to remove it and too humble to display it proudly, has simply allowed time to soften its presence into invisibility. Surrounding the house and barn, a living tapestry of carefully tended outbuildings unfolds in unhurried sequence. There is the spring house, a small stone structure built directly over a cold, clear spring, its interior cool and dim, its shelves lined with crocks of butter and pitchers of cream submerged in the gently flowing water. There is the smokehouse, its dark walls saturated with the accumulated essence of decades of hickory smoke, its door perpetually fragrant with the memory of curing hams and bacons. There is the chicken coop, low and tidy, painted the same soft white as the main house, its small yard scratched bare by the ceaseless industry of the speckled hens. There is the woodshed, neat as a Sunday hymnal, its split logs stacked in patterns of such geometric precision that they seem almost a form of devotional art. Between these structures, narrow paths of beaten earth and stepping stones wind through small kitchen gardens where rows of pole beans climb up cedar tripods, where the broad leaves of squash overlap in patient green abundance, where the feathery fronds of dill and the silvery clusters of sage grow in companionable proximity. A pump handle rises beside a low stone basin near the kitchen door, its iron darkened by countless gripping hands, its spout permanently haloed by a small green growth of moss where the water has splashed and dripped for 100,000 mornings. The whole farmstead, taken together, gives the impression of something not built but grown, not designed but discovered, as though the house and barn and gardens had simply emerged from the soil over the slow course of a century, each element settling into its rightful place the way river stones settle into the bed of a stream. There is no fence line that does not curve gently with the contours of the land. There is no roof angle that does not echo the slope of a nearby hill. There is no straight line anywhere upon the property that has not softened into a gentle curve through the patient action of weather and time. And there, at the kitchen door, a soft yellow lamplight still glows in the grey-blue stillness of dawn, awaiting your quiet approach. The kitchen door is a humble masterpiece, the kind of object that one might walk past 1,000 times without ever truly seeing, until the morning when one finally pauses and looks and sees. It is constructed of vertical planks of hand-planned white pine, each board fitted to its neighbour with such patient craftsmanship that the seams between them are barely visible even in the slanting light of early morning. The wood has aged to a warm honey colour, deepened in places by the long accumulated touch of countless hands, lightened in others by the patient bleaching action of summer suns reaching across the porch in the late afternoons. The door's hardware is a quiet poem in iron. The hinges are long strap hinges, hand-forged in the local smithy perhaps 50 winters ago, their surfaces marked by the gentle dimples of the smith's hammer, their black iron softened to a deep grey-brown by patient oxidation. The latch is a simple thumb latch, its lever worn smooth and slightly hollowed by the pressing of innumerable thumbs across the long parade of the years. Above the latch, a small iron loop holds a length of soft rawhide cord, knotted at intervals, used to keep the door wedged open during the warmer months when the kitchen breathes gently with the morning air. You raise your hand to the latch, though you have no need to, for in this gentle dream the door simply opens of its own accord, swinging inward on hinges that creak in a low, comfortable register, the kind of soft musical sigh that an old door makes when it greets a familiar friend. The threshold beneath your feet is a slab of bluestone, quarried from a riverbed perhaps 6 miles distant and hauled here by ox cart in the spring of 1843, its surface worn into a soft concave hollow by the patient passage of work boots, bare feet, the dragging of grain sacks, the pacing of countless watchful mothers waiting for husbands to return from the back 40. Stepping across the threshold, you find yourself in a small entry chamber, what the family calls the wash porch, though it is more accurately a transitional space, a quiet breath between the outer world and the inner sanctuary of the kitchen proper. The walls here are whitewashed plaster over hand-split lath, their surface bearing the soft irregularities of work done patiently by candlelight. A row of wooden pegs runs along the left wall, each peg shaped from a single piece of cherry wood, polished smooth by the weight of hung coats and bonnets. Upon the pegs hang 3 black wool coats of slightly different sizes, a straw hat with a wide flat brim, a child's small woolen cap, and a long oilcloth slicker still bearing the faint sweet scent of the linseed oil with which it was treated last autumn. A small wooden bench runs along the right wall, its seat polished by the sliding of countless work trousers, its legs splayed slightly outward in the patient manner of furniture made without nails. Beneath the bench, a row of work boots stands in quiet inspection, the father's heavy leather boots, their toes scuffed and resoled twice, the elder son's boots only slightly smaller, the younger son's boots much smaller still, their leather still stiff from the cobbler's recent attentions, and a pair of wooden clogs painted black, used for the wettest barn work in the muddy weeks of spring thaw. A single small window no larger than a folded napkin allows a square of pale gold morning light to enter the wash porch. The glass is hand-blown, slightly wavy, its surface bearing tiny circular bubbles trapped within the pane like fossils of long evaporated breath. The light passing through this irregular glass is itself made gentle, softened, fractured into faint shimmering ripples that play slowly across the whitewashed wall opposite, shifting almost imperceptibly as the sun climbs by the smallest of degrees toward its mid-morning station. A second door leads from the wash porch into the kitchen proper, and this door, unlike the outer door, has no latch, only a wooden knob worn to a satin gloss by the daily turning of palms across the long decades. You push the knob gently, and the door swings open into a space so warm, so fragrant, so utterly hushed in its early morning peace, that you find yourself instinctively slowing your breath, lowering your shoulders, surrendering whatever small tension you may have carried across the threshold. The kitchen is the soul of the house, and like all true souls, it reveals itself slowly, layer by gentle layer. The first impression is one of warmth, a soft, dry, comforting warmth radiating from the great cast-iron cook stove that occupies the center of the eastern wall. The stove is a magnificent creature of black enamel and chrome trim, its surface kept polished by patient applications of stove blacking, its body decorated only with the subtle scrollwork that the iron foundry, in a moment of restrained whimsy, allowed to grace the casting moulds. A kettle of water sits upon the back burner, sending up a thin, twisting plume of steam that rises and dissipates against the timber-beamed ceiling. The walls of the kitchen are whitewashed like the rest of the house, but here the white has been softened over years of cooking into a faint, warm cream, especially near the ceiling where the patient kisses of wood smoke and the breath of countless steaming pots have left their gentle calligraphy. The floor is wide pine planks, each plank perhaps 14 inches across, the wood polished to a soft amber by generations of sweeping and the gentle abrasion of wooden chair legs. In places the boards have worn into shallow troughs along the most travelled paths, the way river stones wear into the hollows of stream beds. A long wooden table dominates the centre of the room, its top scrubbed pale with sand and lye soap until the wood has taken on the soft white gold of old ivory. The table is large enough to seat 10, with a long bench running along each of its long sides and a single chair at each of its short ends. The benches are simple, unadorned, fitted with hand-carved support brackets shaped from single pieces of oak. The chairs are slightly more refined, with shaped backs and turned legs, made by a great-uncle who was, in his quieter hours, something of a craftsman. Upon the table this morning rests an empty earthenware bowl, the colour of rich cream, a wooden butter mould carved with the shape of a single sheaf of wheat, a tin of coarse salt, and a small clay pitcher beaded with the cool sweat of fresh well water. The light from the eastern window falls across these objects in soft, golden bands, catching the rim of the pitcher, illuminating the swirled grain of the wooden mould, glinting upon a single grain of salt that has escaped the tin and now lies dreaming upon the white wood plane of the tabletop, a tiny crystalline mountain awaiting some patient hand. You stand here in this hushed and golden room and feel the slow heartbeat of the farmhouse around you, the soft creaking of timbers settling into their morning warmth, the distant cluck of a hen in the yard, the patient ticking of an unseen clock somewhere in the parlour beyond, and you understand, with a deep and sleepy clarity, that you have entered a place where time itself moves with the patience of slow honey. The cook stove deserves a full and quiet contemplation, for it is in many ways the silent heart of the farmhouse, the patient pulse around which the daily rhythms of the family arrange themselves like iron filings around a magnet. It stands 4 feet tall and perhaps 5 feet long, an imposing creature of black cast iron forged in a foundry far away in Lancaster City, hauled to the farm by wagon 37 winters past, and tended ever since with the quiet devotion that lesser cultures might reserve for shrines or thrones. Its surface this morning is warm to the touch but not yet hot, the embers from last night's banking still glowing gently in the firebox, the kettle upon its back burner whispering a soft hush of steam that rises in a thin twisting ribbon toward the ceiling. The stove's body is composed of countless individual castings, each piece bearing the subtle texture of the foundry sand in which it was moulded, each surface polished to a deep matte black by the patient and unceasing application of stove blacking, a viscous substance compounded of graphite soap and a small measure of beeswax. The blacking is applied every Friday evening, a small ritual performed by the mother of the household with a soft cloth and a wooden-handled brush, her movements slow and meditative, her eyes half closed in the hypnotic rhythm of the work. The result is a surface of such deep, soft blackness that it seems almost to absorb the light, lending the stove a quality of solemn presence, the way a deep pool of still water absorbs the sky. The firebox door is a small marvel of practical design, hinged on the left, latched on the right by a simple iron lever shaped to fit the curve of a thumb. Within the firebox, the embers from last night's banked fire glow with a soft orange light, their colour shifting almost imperceptibly through gradations of coral and persimmon and the deep heart red of overripe cherries. Tiny blue flames flicker occasionally at the surface of the embers where pockets of unburned gas escape and ignite, dancing for a heartbeat or two before subsiding back into the slow, patient glow. The smell of the firebox is a layered tapestry of scents. The dry sweetness of seasoned hickory, the faintly resinous note of the pine kindling used to start last evening's fire, the warm mineral perfume of the iron itself, and beneath all of these a deep, ancient, almost subterranean quality of smoke that has soaked into every fibre of the stove's substance across the long decades of its faithful service. Above the firebox, upon the cooking surface, a series of round iron lids cover the burner openings, each lid removable by means of a slotted iron tool that hangs from a peg upon the wall behind the stove. The lids are arranged in a careful hierarchy according to their proximity to the firebox, with the hottest lid directly above the fire, used for searing and rapid boiling, and the cooler lid stretching away toward the warming oven on the far end of the stove, used for the gentlest of slow simmerings. The cooking surface itself is faintly textured with the patient impressions of decades of pot bottoms, a topographical map of countless suppers, breakfasts, and the long midday dinners that punctuate the working hours of a farming family. The warming oven occupies the upper portion of the stove, a chamber of polished tin set above the cooking surface, its interior used for keeping food warm, while other dishes finish their slower cooking. Within the warming oven this morning rests a covered pottery dish containing the previous evening's bread, kept soft and faintly fragrant for the morning's table. The tin walls of the warming oven have darkened over the years to the colour of pewter, their surface marked here and there by faint amber stains where butter or honey has slowly dripped and then been wiped away. The handle of the warming oven door is a small carved wooden knob, originally walnut, now polished to a deep mahogany sheen by the patient action of countless gripping fingers. Beneath the firebox, a small ash drawer extends out toward the floor, used to collect the previous fire's gentle grey remains. The ashes themselves are a thing of quiet beauty, soft as powdered snow, the colour of dove feathers, holding in their fine substance the chemical memory of every tree that has given itself to the family's warmth. These ashes are not discarded, they are saved in a wooden barrel beside the woodshed, used eventually for soap making, for amending the kitchen garden's soil, for sprinkling upon the icy flagstones of the yard during the slippery weeks of February. Even the ash, on this farm, has a purpose, a destination, a continuing life beyond the fire that birthed it. A wooden box beside the stove holds the kindling and the smaller split logs, the wood arranged in a careful order that reflects the daughter's morning work 2 hours ago, when she rose before the sun to feed the fire its first patient meal of the day. The kindling is composed of pine, split fine and dry, its surface bearing the slightly rougher quality of split grain rather than sawn grain, its scent sharp and resinous and clean. The larger logs are hickory and oak, dense and heavy, their bark partially flaking away to reveal the smooth pale wood beneath. Each log has been split during the long calm weeks of last November, then stacked beneath the south-facing eaves of the woodshed for a full year of patient seasoning, until the moisture within the wood has fallen to that ideal range where it will burn slowly and hot, with the minimum of smoke and the maximum of gentle, lingering warmth. The stovepipe rises from the back of the stove in a column of dull grey-black metal, ascending through the ceiling, and onward through the roof to terminate in a brick chimney that emerges from the cedar shingles like a small, thoughtful sentinel. Within the stovepipe, the morning's first thin smoke rises with that particular slow, unhurried quality of smoke from a banked fire, a soft grey vapour that emerges from the chimney and rises perhaps 10 feet into the still morning air before dissipating into invisibility against the pale blue sky. From a distance, the chimney's small offering of smoke is the first visible sign that the farmhouse has begun its day, a quiet, vertical signal that within these walls the heart of the home is beating warm and steady. Beside the stove, a low wooden chair holds a small basket of mending, abandoned half-finished from the previous evening, a needle still threaded with dark grey wool thrust into the fabric of a child's sock awaiting its patient repair. The wool of the sock has worn thin at the heel, where the small foot it dresses has run barefoot across too many summer fields. The mother of the household will return to this work after breakfast, sitting in the soft warmth radiating from the stove, her fingers moving with the slow, sure rhythm of someone who has darned 10,000 socks across the slow accumulating decades of her life. The needle will rise and fall, in a meditative pattern as old as cloth itself, while the kettle whispers its patient steam, and the firebox glows, and the morning slowly deepens into its golden noon. A narrow doorway leads from the kitchen into the parlour, that more formal chamber where the family gathers in the long blue evenings, where the Sunday meal is sometimes taken when guests are present, and where the patient business of reading and quiet conversation unfolds beneath the soft glow of oil lamps. The doorway itself is framed by hand-planed pine boards, joined at the corners with mitered seams so precise that one could not slip the edge of a thin paper between them. The threshold beneath your feet is a slightly raised strip of oak, polished by passage to a soft caramel sheen, its grain visible in long flowing waves like the patterns of wind upon a still pond. The parlour unfolds before you in proportions that feel both intimate and quietly spacious. The room is perhaps 18 feet long and 14 feet wide, with a ceiling of exposed timber beams from which depend the long iron hooks where, in colder months, drying herbs and peppers and bunches of seed corn are hung in patient rows. The floors here are of broader pine planks than in the kitchen, some of them nearly 20 inches across, their wood polished by the soft tread of stockinged feet to a deep amber gold that catches the light from the windows and holds it, glowing softly. 2 windows occupy the eastern wall of the parlour, each composed of 12 small panes of hand-blown glass, set in a wooden grid painted the same pale ivory as the trim throughout the house. The glass in these windows is older than the glass in the kitchen, slightly more irregular, more visibly marked by the swirls and bubbles and soft circular ripples that record the ancient art of the glassblower's craft. The light passing through these windows is fractured into countless small patterns of brightness, each pane casting its own subtly different rectangle of gold upon the floor, the rectangles shifting slowly across the room as the morning progresses, sliding from east to west like the patient hands of an enormous, gentle clock. The walls of the parlour are whitewashed, but the whiteness here has settled into a quality slightly different from that of the kitchen, lacking the warm cream tones that cooking has imparted, retaining instead a cooler, more contemplative pallor, the colour of clean linen folded in a cedar chest. Along the southern wall hangs a single decorative item, the only such concession to ornament in the entire house, a sampler stitched many years ago by a great-aunt, framed in a simple cherrywood frame, displaying in cross-stitched letters the words of the Lord's Prayer and a small border of stylized vines. The threads of the sampler have softened with age into muted hues of dove-grey and faded indigo, their colours no longer vivid but rather suggestive, like memories of colour, like the recollection of a dress once worn at a long-ago wedding. The furniture of the parlour is sparse and deliberately so. A long-settle bench occupies the wall opposite the windows, its back high enough to reach the shoulders of a seated adult, its seat softened by a single hand-stitched cushion of plain blue cotton stuffed with carded wool. Beside the bench stands a small round table of cherry wood, its surface protected by a runner of cream linen, upon which rests a single oil lamp with a clear glass chimney, a small box of wooden matches, and a leather-bound family Bible whose covers have softened over generations of patient handling into a texture like fine kid leather. The Bible's pages are edged in gilt that has tarnished to the colour of antique brass, and a faded blue silk ribbon marks a passage in the Book of Proverbs where someone long ago was reading and was called away. 3 rocking chairs are arranged in a loose semicircle facing the western wall, where a small wood-burning stove provides supplementary warmth in the cold months. The rocking chairs are nearly identical in their design, their runners curved with a precision that suggests a single patient maker, their seats woven of split rush dyed a soft wheaten gold. The chair on the left, slightly larger than the others, is the father's chair, marked by the patient compression of the rush seat where he has sat for 30 winters, his back leaning into the same precise curve, his hands resting upon the same smooth armrests. The chair on the right is the mother's, slightly smaller, slightly more upright, its rush seat showing the gentle hollow where her position has been maintained across the long decades. The middle chair is for guests or for whichever child has earned, by some small kindness or chore well done, the brief honour of sitting between the parents during the evening's reading. The wood-burning stove in the parlour is smaller than the kitchen cook stove, a simple boxy cast-iron heater whose surface is unornamented save for a single panel on its front, depicting in low relief a harvest scene of stylized wheat sheaves bound with twisted ribbons. The stove sits upon a square of slate flagstones set into the floor, the slate worn slightly hollow in front of the firebox door from the patient rocking back and forth of countless feet warming themselves on cold January nights. Beside the stove rests a small wicker basket containing a careful selection of dry kindling and 3 perfectly seasoned hickory logs, their bark partially peeled away, their cut ends showing the close-spaced rings that mark slow-grown wood from the deep northern hollows of the property. The parlour's southern wall holds a tall corner cupboard built directly into the room when the house was first constructed, its doors of glass and hand-planed wood, its shelves lined with the family's modest collection of finer dishware. Within the cupboard rests a set of cream-coloured ironstone plates, 8 in number, each plate slightly different in its weight and rim due to the small irregularities of its hand finishing. Beside the plates stands a row of pewter mugs, their surfaces dulled to a soft grey by patient oxidation, their handles worn smooth where countless thumbs have hooked over them at countless suppers. A small porcelain teapot, a wedding gift from the grandmother's mother, occupies the place of honour upon the top shelf, its glaze decorated with a single sprig of stylized clover, its spout chipped slightly where it once tapped against a wooden countertop in a moment of inattention many decades ago. The doorway from the parlour leads onward, deeper into the house, opening into a narrow hallway that runs the length of the structure's central axis. From this hallway, one may turn left into the small bedroom that serves as the grandmother's chamber, or right into the family sitting room where the spinning wheel and the loom occupy the more practical hours of the women's days. Straight ahead, a steep wooden staircase rises toward the upper floor, its treads worn into soft hollows by the patient passage of bare feet, its banister polished to a deep warm brown by the gentle gripping of countless palms. The whole parlour exists in a state of perfect quietness this morning, the only sound the soft ticking of a wooden mantel clock upon the fireplace shelf, its pendulum swinging in slow steady arcs, its brass face catching the eastern light, its hands measuring out the patient minutes of a day that knows no urgency, holds no hurry, recognizes no demand greater than the slow turning of the earth toward its noon. The staircase rises in a quiet sequence of 14 worn pine treads, each step polished by the slow accumulation of footsteps across the long generations, the wood at the centre of each tread worn perhaps a 1/4 inch lower than the wood at the edges, forming gentle hollows that mark the precise paths of countless ascending and descending feet. The banister beneath your hand is a single-shaped piece of cherry wood, turned upon a foot-pedalled lathe by a great-grandfather whose hands you can almost feel beneath the patina of 70 winters of subsequent gripping. Where the banister curves at the top of the stairs, the wood has darkened to the colour of old tea, and the small carved acorn that finishes the post is worn so smooth it could be mistaken for polished stone. The upper hallway is narrow, perhaps 4 feet wide, its floor of pine planks running lengthwise the full distance of the second story. The walls are whitewashed, the ceiling slopes gently inward where the eaves of the house begin to come down, and at intervals along the corridor, simple wooden doors lead to the various sleeping chambers. The doors are unpainted, their pine darkened naturally to a soft honey colour, each one fitted with a small iron latch and a wooden knob worn smooth by the daily turning of palms. The hallway smells faintly of cedar from the linen press at its far end, of the lavender and rosemary sachets tucked among the folded sheets, and of the dry ancient sweetness of pine timbers that have been seasoning quietly within these walls for over a century. The first door on the right opens into the parents' bedchamber, the largest of the upper rooms, its proportions softened by the slope of the ceiling where the dormer cuts inward toward the front of the house. The room is roughly 15 feet square, with a single window facing east, set deep within the thickness of the wall and framed by simple muslin curtains so faded by the morning sun that their original pale blue has surrendered into a colour closer to the inside of a seashell. The curtains move barely perceptibly in the soft draught that circulates through the house even on the stillest of mornings, the kind of breath of air one feels only at the back of the neck when one stands very, very still. The bed itself dominates the room, a 4-poster of cherry wood whose carved acorns at each corner echo the smaller acorn at the staircase, the work of the same patient great-grandfather. The bedposts rise perhaps 6 feet from the floor, their surfaces faceted by the slow gentle scraping of the lathe blade. their surfaces polished to a deep red brown by generations of patient dusting and the quiet brushing of bedding being folded back. The headboard is a single broad panel of cherry, its grain rising in long flowing waves like the swells of a calm sea, its surface unornamented save for a single shallow groove that runs along its upper edge, a quiet decorative line that seems to whisper rather than declare itself. The mattress is a thick tick of striped blue and white cotton, stuffed with the down of geese raised on the farm and carded by the women's hands during the long quiet hours of February evenings. The down within the tick has settled over many seasons into a deep, soft, almost weightless cushion, the kind of mattress that seems to receive the body rather than support it, that cradles rather than holds. Atop the mattress lie sheets of homespun linen woven on the loom in the family sitting room from flax grown in the western fields, bleached pale by patient laying out in the summer sun, smoothed by the quiet pressing of an iron heated upon the kitchen stove. The sheets have been washed perhaps 200 times over the decades, and their surface has developed that particular soft, slightly napped quality of linen that has been long loved, the threads gently worn into a texture closer to mothwing than to fabric. A patchwork quilt covers the bed, its surface a quiet mosaic of small cotton squares in the muted colours permitted by the tradition: deep navy blue, soft sage green, pale wheaten yellow, dark plum, and the cream of unbleached muslin. The quilt is composed of perhaps 2,000 individual pieces, each cut from the leftovers of dresses, shirts, aprons, and bonnets, sewn across 40 years of the household's history. The mother could trace, with her finger, the origin of nearly every piece. This navy square came from her wedding dress, this sage from a Sunday apron, this wheaten yellow from a child's first smock, this plum from a winter shawl that was eventually outgrown and cut down. The quilt is therefore not merely a cover, but a textile autobiography, a soft chronicle of the family's life laid gently across the bed each morning and folded back each evening. A small braided rug rests upon the floor beside the bed, woven from strips of old fabric in concentric rings of muted colour, its centre worn slightly more than its edges from the patient placement of bare feet upon it during the cold mornings of winter. Beside the rug stands a low wooden washstand, its top fitted with a white ceramic pitcher and a matching basin, both of them unornamented, both of them kept ready for the morning's cold water washing. A small white towel hangs from a wooden peg beside the washstand, its surface worn soft as flannel by countless launderings, its corners faintly fringed where the threads have begun their slow, patient unravelling. The second bedchamber across the hallway belongs to the daughters of the household, 3 sisters who share the room according to the gentle traditions of the community. Their room is smaller, with 2 dormered windows facing south, and contains 2 beds of plainer construction, simple pine frames with rope-supported mattresses. The walls are whitewashed, the floor bare pine, and the only decoration is a small needlepoint of a stylized tulip hanging upon the eastern wall, the work of the eldest daughter when she was 12. A wooden chest at the foot of one bed holds the daughters' folded dresses and aprons, each garment in its proper plain colour, each pressed and folded with the quiet care that the work of women's hands requires. The third bedchamber at the end of the hallway belongs to the sons, 2 brothers of the household. Their room mirrors the daughters' in its plainness: 2 pine beds, a single chest, a small braided rug between the beds, and on a peg by the door, the wide-brimmed straw hats that they will wear during the day's work in the fields. A 4th small chamber, tucked beneath the slope of the western eaves, contains a single narrow bed for the youngest child, a small boy of 7, whose feet have not yet quite worn paths into the floorboards, whose presence in the household is still being slowly inscribed upon the architecture of the house. The room is barely 6 feet wide, but it has its own small window, its own braided rug, its own wooden peg for a small wool coat, and at the head of the bed a tiny shelf holding 3 smooth river stones the boy has gathered, 3 stones whose particular gleaming, whose particular weight in his small hand, has earned them the dignity of being kept. The household stirs slowly in the manner of a thing accustomed to its own gentle awakening. No jangling alarms, no urgent clattering, only the soft accumulating signs of life beginning to circulate once again through the patient veins of the house. The first sign is the deepening of the kettle's whisper upon the cook stove, as the embers settle and the water within begins to shift from the bare suggestion of warmth to the soft preparatory murmur that precedes a true simmer. The second sign is the faint creaking of the floorboards above the kitchen, where the mother of the household has risen from the bed and now moves with the quiet, practiced grace of someone who has performed this same morning choreography for 30 consecutive years. She rises before the first true light while the eastern sky is still that soft gradient of indigo bleeding into rose, and her movements within the bedchamber are so familiar that she requires no candle. Her bare feet find the braided rug, then the cool pine boards, then the small washstand where she pours a measure of cold water from the pitcher into the basin, and washes her face with the patient, unhurried attention that small daily rituals deserve. The water is cold enough to send a soft shock of wakefulness across her skin, but not so cold as to startle, for the pitcher has stood within the house overnight, and the chill of the well has long since softened into the cooler register of room temperature. She dresses in the soft gloom by long practiced touch, finding her undergarments folded upon the wooden chair beside the bed, her plain dark dress hanging upon the peg by the door, her white prayer covering set carefully upon the top of the chest. The dress is of a deep navy cotton, plain and unornamented as the tradition requires, fastened at the front with small pewter pins rather than buttons, its skirt falling to within several inches of the floor in the modest cut that the community considers proper. Over the dress she ties an apron of pale grey, its strings crossed behind her back and brought forward to be tied at the waist in a simple knot. The prayer covering is the last item, a small white cap of starched cotton that she settles upon her hair with the practiced gesture of 1,000 mornings, anchoring it with a single pin so finely placed as to be invisible to anyone but herself. She descends the stairs in silent stockinged feet, her hand trailing softly upon the banister, her footsteps falling upon the worn hollows of the treads with such patient familiarity that the wood does not even creak beneath her. At the foot of the stairs, she pauses for the smallest of moments, listening to the quiet of the house, hearing the soft tick of the parlour clock, the distant whisper of the kettle in the kitchen, the barely audible breath of the rooster in the barnyard, who has not yet quite mustered his full enthusiasm for the dawn. Then she moves on, into the kitchen, where the morning's true work will begin. Her first action is to open the firebox of the cookstove and feed it. She kneels before the stove with the slow grace of someone whose knees have learned the particular accommodation that this gesture requires, draws back the iron door with its small comfortable squeak, and surveys the embers within. Last night's banking has held its warmth perfectly, the embers glowing at their hearts with the deep coral red that signals a fire ready to receive its morning meal. She selects 3 small pieces of pine kindling from the woodbox, places them carefully upon the embers in the cross-hatched arrangement that her mother taught her at the age of 9, and waits the half-minute or so until the kindling catches with a soft sigh of small flame. Then she adds 2 slightly larger pieces of split hickory, closes the door, adjusts the damper with the quiet, practiced flick of a finger, and rises to her feet to continue the morning's work. Upstairs the father has now also risen, and his movements within the parents' bedchamber are slightly more pronounced than his wife's, the soft thump of his work boots being pulled on, the gentle creak of the bed frame as he sits to lace them, the patient murmur of his morning prayer spoken so quietly that it seems more breath than voice. He dresses in his work clothes, plain dark trousers held by leather suspenders, a long-sleeved shirt of unbleached homespun, a vest of darker wool buttoned with simple bone buttons. His beard, which he has worn since the year of his marriage as the tradition requires, is thick and dark with only the faintest threading of silver at its edges, and he runs a wooden comb through it slowly, as he stands by the window watching the sky deepen from indigo into the pale rose of true dawn. The children stir more gradually, in the manner of children everywhere across history. The eldest son is the first of them to rise, a boy of 15 whose body has begun the slow patient process of lengthening into manhood, his shoulders broader now than they were a year ago, his voice settling into the lower registers. He rises with the silent efficiency of someone who knows that the cows are waiting, dresses in the dim light of his shared chamber, splashes cold water upon his face from the small basin he and his brother share, and descends the stairs in soft, steady footfalls that announce themselves only by the smallest creakings of the central staircase. The younger son, 12 years old, follows perhaps 3 minutes behind his brother, his movements slightly less practiced, his hair still tousled by the night, his eyes slightly puffy with the patient struggle of a young body, slowly relinquishing the deep, gentle grip of sleep. He pauses on the stairs to yawn so widely that his jaw makes a soft, soundless click, then continues downward, his small bare feet finding the hollows of the treads in their familiar, accustomed way. The daughters rise more or less in concert, the three of them moving through their shared chamber in a quiet choreography of dressing and folding and covering of hair, their voices kept soft to a mere whisper out of the long accumulated habit of a household where the mornings are considered sacred to a quiet that no one quite remembers being asked to maintain. The eldest daughter, 16, ties on her white prayer covering with the same practiced gesture as her mother. The middle daughter, 14, folds back the bedclothes of her bed with neat, precise turnings of the linen. The youngest daughter, 11, struggles briefly with the strings of her apron before her sister leans over and ties them for her with a quick, affectionate gesture and a brief, soft smile that no one else witnesses. The youngest child, the 7-year-old boy, is the last to rise, and he does so only when his mother climbs the stairs to gently shake his shoulder, her hand resting upon him with such soft tenderness that he wakes not into startlement, but into the slow, patient understanding that morning has come, that the day waits, that the warmth of the kitchen is ready to receive him as it has received him every morning of his small remembered life. The father and the two sons step out into the morning together, the kitchen door closing behind them with a soft, familiar clack of its iron latch, their breath rising in small, ghostly plumes upon the still, cool air. The yard between the house and the barn is dewed silver in the slanting light of dawn, every blade of grass bearing its tiny, perfect droplet, every spider's web suspended between the rails of the garden fence, catching the rose gold of the eastern sky in patterns of such delicate geometry that the world seems for a moment to be made entirely of light and small, precise wonder. The father leads the way, his work boots leaving soft, dark impressions in the dewed grass, his sons following a few paces behind in a loose, unhurried procession. The eldest son carries an empty wooden bucket, its handle of curved iron worn smooth by the gripping of many palms across its long working life. The younger son carries nothing yet, for his task this morning will be to gather the eggs from the henhouse, and his hands must remain free for the gentle, careful work of slipping them from the warm straw of the nesting boxes into his upturned shirt-tail. The walk to the barn is perhaps 60 paces, but it is a walk through which the father's mind moves slowly across the patient inventory of the morning's tasks, his eyes noting the height of the sun, the direction of the breeze, the soft bank of clouds gathering low upon the western horizon that suggests the possibility of rain by mid-afternoon. He knows by long experience that the rain will not come before noon, that the morning's hay-cutting in the lower meadow may safely proceed, but that he should send the eldest son to begin tedding the cut hay of the upper meadow earlier than usual, so that it may dry sufficiently to be raked into windrows before any moisture arrives. These calculations move through his mind not as conscious thought, but as a kind of slow sensory weighing, the way a man feels the weight of a sack of grain by lifting it and knows without computing whether it is full or merely half. The barn looms before them, its great vertical pine boards weathered to that deep brown that has been described already, its massive sliding door standing slightly ajar from last night's closing. The father grips the wooden handle of the door, slides it open along its iron track with a long, slow groan that is not so much a complaint as a kind of greeting, and steps into the barn's interior with the easy familiarity of a man entering his own bedroom in the dark. The interior of the barn is a cathedral of patient labour, its high timber rafters lost in the soft darkness above, its lower spaces dimly lit by the two small windows that pierce the eastern wall and now admit thin slanting bars of dawn light. Within these bars of light dust motes dance in slow lazy spirals 1,000 tiny particles of straw chaff and hayseed, and the soft fine powder that accumulates in any space where animals and grain coexist. The motes drift downward with such slowness that they seem to defy the very concept of falling, more like swimmers in water than dust in air, settling upon the wide pine planks of the threshing floor in soft golden constellations. The smell of the barn is a complex tapestry that opens itself only gradually to the senses. First, there is the warm, sweet breath of the hay stored in the great mow above, that particular fragrance of dried meadow grasses that holds within itself the entire memory of last summer's flowering. The clover and timothy and orchard grass and bluestem and the small scattered clovers of red and white. Beneath this scent lies the warm, earthy presence of the animals themselves. The cows in their stanchions emitting that comforting bovine warmth that is composed of grass breath and the steam of large patient bodies. The horses in their stalls adding their slightly different scent of leather and clean sweat and the faint resinous note of the pine shavings that line their floors. Beneath all of these lies the deep, enduring quality of the barn itself, the smell of weathered wood and old hay and patient stone, and the long accumulated essence of generations of barn cats and swallows and the small insects that live in the cracks between the boards. The cows have heard the door slide open, and they shift now with that soft companionable expectation that milking time produces, their heavy bodies turning slightly within their stanchions, their long-lashed eyes swinging toward the sound of the father's footsteps. There are 7 cows in the herd, each with her own name, each with her own particular temperament that the father knows as intimately as he knows the temperaments of his own children. Bessie, the eldest, is the lead cow, calm and patient, the first to be milked because her milk lets down most easily. Daisy, second in the line, is younger and slightly more restless, requires gentle words and a steady hand. Mabel, third, is a placid creature whose milk runs sweet and abundant. The remaining 4 are younger heifers, recent additions to the herd, each in her own stage of becoming a proper milking cow. The father moves to the cabinet on the wall and removes the small 3-legged milking stool, its seat polished by countless milkings to a soft caramel sheen. He carries the stool and a clean tin pail to Bessie's stanchion, places the stool beside her right flank, sets the pail upon the straw-strewn floor, and lowers himself into position with the easy familiar grace of a man who has performed this gesture perhaps 50,000 times across his life. He rests his forehead briefly against Bessie's warm flank, a gesture of communion older than any spoken language, and Bessie shifts her weight slightly in acknowledgement, her tail giving one slow patient swish. The milking begins. The father's hands close around the cow's teats with the gentle sure pressure that this work requires, and the first stream of milk strikes the bottom of the empty pail with a soft musical ring, a clear small chime that gradually deepens as the pail begins to fill. The rhythm of the milking is steady and meditative, the sound shifting from the bright ring of milk on metal to the softer foaming sound of milk on milk, the warm liquid rising in the pail at a pace that seems hardly to move, and yet after some patient minutes has filled the pail nearly to its brim. Meanwhile, the elder son has begun his own work in the next stanchion, milking Daisy with the same patient rhythm, though his hands are slightly less practiced, and his pail fills more slowly. The younger son has slipped out the side door of the barn and crossed the yard to the hen house, where he now moves through the dim interior, gently lifting the speckled hens from their nesting boxes and slipping the warm brown eggs into the upturned hem of his shirt. The eggs are smooth and warm and surprisingly heavy in their small numbers, and he handles them with the careful concentration of a boy who has been taught, over many patient mornings, that an egg dropped is a breakfast lost. While the men move through the barn with their patient milking and the gentle gathering of eggs, the women of the household have begun their own quiet morning work, a parallel choreography of tasks that unfolds within the kitchen, the spring house, the kitchen garden, and the small dairy room where the cream is set to rise and the butter is churned. The mother, having fed the cook stove and set the kettle to its full boil, now moves to the small wooden table beneath the eastern window, where the morning's bread dough rests beneath a clean linen cloth, its surface slowly rising under the patient action of the wild yeasts that have been cultivated within the household's sourdough crock for over 40 years. She lifts the linen cloth with a soft, careful gesture, revealing the dough beneath, a pale silken mound that has nearly doubled itself overnight, its surface bearing the soft tracery of small bubbles where the yeasts have been quietly breathing through the long hours of darkness. The dough has the colour of fresh cream and the texture of something halfway between cloth and skin, a substance that seems alive in some subtle way that has nothing to do with movement and everything to do with potential. She runs her fingers lightly across its surface, gauging its readiness by touch alone, and finds it perfect, ready to be turned out upon the floured board for its morning shaping. She works the dough with the practiced rhythmic motion of a woman who has shaped perhaps 20,000 loaves in the long course of her life, her palms pressing forward, the heel of her hand turning the dough in patient quarter rotations, her fingers folding and tucking with the unconscious precision of someone whose hands know their work better than her mind does. The dough yields beneath her palms with a soft, elastic resistance, releasing a faint, sweet, sour smell that mingles with the wood smoke of the cook stove and the tang of the morning air, still drifting through the partially opened window. While the dough rests for its second rising, the mother turns her attention to the small dairy room that opens off the kitchen, a cool, dim chamber whose stone walls maintain a temperature several degrees lower than the rest of the house, even on the warmest summer days. The dairy is the eldest daughter's particular domain, the place where she performs her most important morning work, and she is already there now, her sleeves rolled to her elbows, her white prayer covering catching the soft light from the small high window. The cream that was skimmed from yesterday's milk has been resting in the wooden butter churn since the previous evening, its temperature maintained at the cool register that proper butter making requires. The eldest daughter now begins the patient rhythmic work of churning, her hands gripping the wooden handle of the dasher and lifting it up and down through the cream with the steady measured cadence of a metronome. The dasher rises and falls, and the cream within the churn passes slowly through its various stages of transformation, first thickening, then frothing, then suddenly breaking into the granular state that signals the imminent separation of butter from buttermilk. The sound of the churning is one of the most characteristic sounds of the farmhouse morning, a soft rhythmic splash and thump that carries through the open doorway of the dairy and into the kitchen, mingling with the whisper of the kettle and the soft creak of the cook stove warming to its working temperature. The eldest daughter's arms move in the steady, patient rhythm she has practiced since the age of 10, her face calm and contemplative, her eyes half-focused upon the middle distance where some small daydream perhaps unfolds itself, until the moment when she feels the resistance within the churn change in that particular way that signals the butter has come. The middle daughter, meanwhile, has gone out to the kitchen garden, that small patient rectangle of cultivated earth that lies just beyond the kitchen door. The garden is enclosed by a low fence of cedar pickets, weathered to a soft silver grey, designed primarily to discourage the chickens from their constant interest in newly turned soil. Within the fence, the garden is laid out in neat rectangular beds separated by narrow paths of wood ash that crunch softly underfoot and discourage slugs by their alkalinity. Each bed holds its particular patient population of growing things, the long row of pole beans climbing their cedar tripods, the broad, sprawling leaves of the squash family, the feathery green plumes of the carrot tops, the silvery rosettes of the cabbages, the dark, glossy leaves of the kale, the slender, upright stalks of the green onions, the spreading mounds of the herbs, thyme and sage and parsley, and the strongly scented oregano. The middle daughter carries a small wicker basket and a pair of garden shears, and her task this morning is to gather the herbs and vegetables that the kitchen will require for the day's meals. She moves through the garden with quiet attention, snipping a small bundle of parsley here, several long green onion stalks there, a single perfect ripe tomato whose red has deepened overnight into the precise shade that signals true readiness. She gathers a handful of the small finger-length cucumbers that are best for the day's pickle making, 2 heads of soft butter lettuce whose leaves have just reached their tender perfection, and a small bundle of dill that she will use later to flavour the cucumber pickling brine. The morning sun has now climbed high enough to clear the eaves of the house, and its warm gold light pours into the garden in bright slanting columns, illuminating the dewdrops that still cling to the lower leaves and turning each one into a tiny perfect prism. The air smells of warm earth and bruised tomato leaves and the sharp, clean note of the herbs, a fragrance so deeply pleasing that the middle daughter pauses for a long moment in the middle of the garden simply to breathe it in, her basket half full upon her arm, her face turned upward toward the patient blue of the morning sky. The youngest daughter, meanwhile, has been sent down the gentle slope behind the house to the spring house, that small stone structure built directly over the cold, clear spring, whose water has flowed faithfully from the same crack in the bedrock for longer than anyone in the community can remember. The spring house is perhaps 8 feet square, its walls of field stones laid in lime mortar, its roof of cedar shingles weathered to a soft pewter grey, its single door of weathered pine fitted with a simple wooden latch. She lifts the latch and steps within, and the temperature drops perhaps 15 degrees in the space of a single breath. The interior of the spring house is dim and cool, lit only by a single small window high in the western wall and by the slanting beams that filter through the cracks between the door's planks. The floor is of flat slate slabs, slightly sloped to allow the spring water to flow gently across them and exit through a small channel in the eastern wall. Down the centre of the room runs a long, shallow trough of fitted stones, perhaps 2 feet wide and 10 feet long, through which the spring water flows constantly at a temperature that hovers always within a few degrees of 45. Within this cold-running stream sit the household's perishables, submerged to varying depths according to their needs. The wide pottery crocks of butter just churned yesterday, their tops covered with squares of clean linen tied with twine. The tall pitchers of fresh milk from yesterday morning's milking, their cream already risen and waiting to be skimmed, a covered jar of buttermilk, several smaller pots of soft fresh cheese, and a careful row of brown eggs gathered the previous day, their shells protected from the water by a small wooden tray. The youngest daughter's task is to skim the cream from yesterday's milk, and she sets to it now with the patient, careful attention of a child who has been entrusted with real and important work. By the time the men return from the barn, their pails of milk warm and frothing with the morning's gathering, the kitchen has transformed itself into a place of fragrant industry. The bread, shaped now into 2 large round loaves, has been slid into the oven of the cook stove, where it will bake for the better part of an hour, filling the house with that incomparable scent that no perfume in the world has ever quite managed to capture. The frying pan upon the stove holds a generous measure of butter that has begun to melt and foam, its surface bubbling gently as the heat rises through the cast iron, its smell rising into the air with the rich, nutty quality that good fresh butter releases at the moment when it begins its transformation. The eldest daughter has finished her churning and now stands at the kitchen sideboard, her sleeves still rolled, her hands working the freshly made butter through several patient washings of cold water from the well. The butter, separated cleanly from its buttermilk, has the colour of pale daffodils and a texture both firm and yielding, a substance that takes the shape of her wooden butter paddle with quiet obedience. She presses it into the carved wooden mould, whose pattern depicts a single sheaf of wheat, packs it down with a few firm strokes, then turns the mould over upon a small plate, and gives it a gentle tap. The butter releases itself perfectly, holding the wheat sheaf impression in crisp, clear detail, and the eldest daughter sets it upon the breakfast table beside the salt cellar with a small private satisfaction at work well done. The middle daughter has returned from the garden with her basket of vegetables, and she now stands at the wooden table cracking eggs into a yellow pottery bowl. The eggs that her younger brother gathered from the hen house just minutes ago, their shells still warm beneath her palms. She cracks each egg with a single sharp tap against the rim of the bowl and a quick separating motion of her fingers, and the yolks fall into the bowl in succession, each one a deep saturated orange, the colour of marigolds, the colour of late autumn maple leaves, the colour that only the eggs of hens fed upon green grass and kitchen scraps, and the small insects of the barnyard can produce. She whisks them with a wooden fork, adding a pinch of salt, a small splash of fresh cream, and turns to pour the mixture into the foaming butter of the frying pan. The youngest daughter, returned from the spring house, has set the pitcher of skimmed milk upon the table, and now arranges the breakfast plates in their proper places. The plates are the cream-coloured ironstone from the parlour cupboard, used for everyday meals, simple and unornamented, each one slightly different in its weight and rim. She places one before each chair, sets a smaller plate beside it for bread and butter, lays down a fork and a knife and a wooden spoon, and adds a small earthenware cup at each setting. Her movements are unhurried and precise, her face quietly absorbed in the work, her lips moving very slightly as she counts the places, one for father, one for mother, one for each of the 3 brothers, one for each of the 2 sisters. Phone for grandmother, who has now descended from her small chamber and sits in the rocking chair by the parlour stove waiting patiently for the meal. The father, having shed his work boots in the wash porch and washed his hands at the basin by the kitchen door, now seats himself at the head of the long table. He is followed by the eldest son, who takes his accustomed place to his father's right, the younger son, who sits across from his elder brother, the middle daughter, who has finished the eggs and now slides into her place beside her younger brother, the youngest son, the 7-year-old, who climbs into his place upon a wooden box that elevates him to the proper height, the youngest daughter, who finishes her arranging and slides into her seat beside her younger brother, the eldest daughter, who carries the platter of scrambled eggs from the stove to the table and takes her place beside her sister, and the mother, who lifts the bread from the oven, sets it upon a wooden cutting board, and brings it to the table along with the kettle of hot water for the morning's tea. Before any food is touched, the father bows his head, and the entire family follows in instant, patient unison. The silence that descends is so complete, so layered, that one becomes aware of sounds that had previously gone unnoticed: the soft tick of the parlour clock, the gentle hiss of the cook stove, the distant cluck of a hen in the yard, the patient breathing of 9 human beings holding themselves perfectly still in the small but profound act of grace. The prayer is silent in the manner of the community's tradition, each member of the family offering their own private thanks within the privacy of their own heart, and the prayer ends only when the father raises his head and unfolds his hands, the small unspoken signal that the meal may now begin. The food is passed in the slow, careful rhythm that proper family meals require. The platter of scrambled eggs moves first from the eldest daughter, who carried it to the table, around the long perimeter of the bench and back through the seated family, each member taking a generous spoonful onto their plate. The eggs are golden and soft, their texture creamy from the cooking in butter and the careful low heat that proper egg cookery requires, their flavour deep and rich in the way that only the truly fresh egg, gathered warm that very morning, can produce. The bread comes next, cut into thick, generous slices, its crust crackling faintly beneath the knife, its interior the colour of pale honeycomb and as soft as a cloud. The butter follows, the wheat sheaf design crowning a small mound of pale yellow upon its plate, its surface beaded with the tiniest droplets of cold water from its washing. A small jar of preserves moves around the table next, the previous summer's strawberry preserve made by the mother and the daughters in a long patient afternoon of August. The berries cooked slowly with sugar and lemon zest until they had thickened into a deep ruby substance that holds within itself the entire memory of last year's June. The preserves are spread upon the buttered bread in small careful smears, and the children's faces brighten visibly at the sweet rich taste, though they take care not to overindulge, for moderation in all small pleasures is a quiet teaching of the household. A pitcher of milk, fresh from the morning's milking, moves around the table as well, the milk poured into each cup at a gentle steady angle, its colour the soft rich cream white that only unprocessed whole milk possesses, its surface beaded with the tiniest pearls of cream that have not quite settled. The grandmother sips her milk slowly, holding her cup in both her thin patient hands, her eyes half closed in some quiet inward contemplation that the rest of the family respects without inquiry. The youngest son drinks his with slightly less ceremony, the white liquid leaving a soft moustache upon his upper lip that his mother gently wipes away with the corner of her apron. The conversation around the table is sparse but warm, brief observations on the weather, the cows, the state of the lower meadows' hay, the progress of the tomatoes in the garden. The voices are quiet and unhurried, the words spoken with the careful weight of people for whom speech is not a thing to be wasted upon idle filling, but rather a thing to be offered, like the bread itself, in measured nourishing portions. The breakfast ends not with any formal declaration, but with a gradual softening of the eating, the youngest son the last to finish his plate, his small fingers gathering the final crumbs of bread with patient concentration. The father rises first, placing his folded napkin beside his plate, and the rest of the family rises in turn according to the gentle hierarchy of the household. The dishes are gathered by the daughters and carried to the wooden sink where they will be washed in hot water from the kettle, scrubbed with sand and lye soap, rinsed in cold water from the pump, and stacked upon the wooden drain board to air dry. The men, meanwhile, prepare for the day's work in the fields. The father moves to the wash porch and pulls on his heavier outer work coat, for although the morning has warmed considerably, the air in the lower meadow will still hold a damp chill until the sun climbs higher. The eldest son fits his straw hat upon his head with a practiced gesture, its wide flat brim casting a soft shadow across his face. The younger son ties on his own smaller hat, less practiced, the hat sitting slightly askew until his elder brother reaches over and adjusts it with a brief affectionate tug. They walk together to the equipment shed, a long low building attached to the side of the barn. Its interior a well-organized inventory of the various implements that the work of the season requires. The shed smells of leather and oil and the warm, dry breath of long-stored wood. Along its walls hang the lighter implements, the rakes and forks and scythes and hoes, each one suspended from a wooden peg, each one cleaned and oiled at the end of its last use, each one ready for its next employment. Upon the floor stand the heavier implements, the wagon, the plough, the hay rake whose long curving tines reach upward like the ribs of some patient mechanical creature. This morning's work will be the cutting of the lower meadow's hay, a task that the father has been planning for several days as he watched the weather and the height of the grasses and the readiness of the seed heads. The hay must be cut at precisely the right moment, when the grass has reached its full height, but before the seed heads have begun to drop their seed, when the moisture content within the stems is at the proper register for cutting, but not so high as to make the drying too prolonged. He has studied the meadow each evening for the past week, walking its perimeter, examining the heads of the timothy and the orchard grass and the clover that grows mingled with them, gauging the conditions by sensors that no machine has ever yet replicated. He selects from the wall a long-handled scythe, its curved blade as long as a tall man's arm, its wooden snath shaped in that elegant double curve that allows the blade to swing parallel to the ground without requiring the cutter to bend his back. The scythe has been sharpened the previous evening, and its edge gleams with a quiet, wicked beauty, a thin line of bright silver against the darker patina of the older steel behind. The father runs his thumb very lightly along the blade with the practiced caution of a man who has spent 40 years with such tools, feeling the precise quality of the edge, finding it perfect, returning the scythe to his shoulder with a comfortable, familiar gesture. The eldest son selects his own scythe, slightly smaller, its blade newer, and not yet as deeply tempered by the patient sharpenings of decades. The younger son takes a wooden hay rake, for he is not yet trusted with the scythe, and his work this morning will be the spreading of the cut grass into thin, even rows, so that it may dry in the morning sun. They walk together out of the shed and across the yard toward the gate that leads down the gentle slope into the lower meadow, their work boots leaving fresh dark impressions in the still dewy grass, their voices low and brief in the patient way of men setting out toward a long day's labour. The lower meadow lies below the farmstead in a broad, gentle bowl, perhaps 3 acres in extent, bounded on the north by the slope upon which the buildings stand, on the east by a row of black walnut and sycamore trees that mark the course of a small stream, on the south by a fieldstone wall that separates this meadow from the next field, and on the west by another fence line beyond which the corn rises in patient green ranks. The meadow this morning is a thing of breathtaking quiet beauty, its tall grasses moving gently in the soft morning breeze, their heads heavy with seed, their stems mingled with the pale lavender of wild bergamot, and the white lace of Queen Anne's flower, and the soft yellow of black-eyed Susans, and the pale pink of clover blossoms. The father reaches the southern edge of the meadow and pauses for a moment, surveying the work before him with the patient gaze of a craftsman approaching his canvas. Then he plants his feet, settles the scythe into the position that his body has known since boyhood, and begins. The first stroke of the scythe is a thing of quiet music. The blade swings in a long flat arc parallel to the ground, the edge catching the grasses at the base of their stems with a soft hissing sound, and the cut grass falls in a smooth uniform layer to his left, the heads of the timothy and the orchard grass and the clover all settling together in a windrow, no thicker than the breadth of his hand. He steps forward perhaps half a pace, and the scythe swings again, another long flat arc, another soft hissing sound, another neat layer of cut grass falling to his left. The rhythm of the work establishes itself within minutes, and after that it carries the body forward of its own momentum, the scythe swinging and swinging in its long patient arcs, the steps falling forward at the same patient cadence, the windrow of cut hay growing behind him in a smooth uniform line that traces his path across the meadow, The eldest son works perhaps 30 paces to his father's left, his own scythe swinging in its similar but slightly less practiced rhythm, his cut growing parallel to his father's, the two windrows lying side by side across the meadow, like long pale ribbons. The younger son follows behind them with his rake, his task to spread the freshly cut hay into thinner rows, so that more of its surface is exposed to the drying air. He works with the patient concentration of a boy who has been entrusted with real responsibility, his small hands gripping the wooden handle of the rake, his arms moving in the steady sweeping motion that lifts and turns the cut grass. The sound of the scythe work is hypnotic in its rhythmic regularity, the soft hiss of the blade through the grass, the quiet rustling of the falling stems, the gentle scraping of the rake behind, the breath of the cutters slowly steadying into the deep, patient cadence that long physical labor produces. The morning sun climbs higher, the dew dries from the standing grasses, and the men work on through the slow accumulation of the hour, their progress visible only in the gradual transformation of standing meadow into smooth windrowed cut, the long patient rectangle of completed work growing slowly behind them, like a tapestry being woven across the green canvas of the field. Birds rise occasionally from the grasses ahead of the cutting meadowlarks and bobolinks, and the occasional small startled rabbit, and the men pause sometimes to allow a creature to escape unharmed into the uncut portion of the meadow. The work is unhurried but steady, and the day stretches before them in patient long hours, while the men cut hay in the lower meadow, while the youngest son alternates between gathering eggs and helping his sisters in the kitchen. The women of the household have moved from the morning's cooking work to the longer, steadier labor of the textile crafts that occupy so much of their daily lives. The kitchen has been cleaned and set to rights, the breakfast dishes washed and dried and returned to their shelves, the floor swept with the long-handled corn broom whose bristles have been worn into a soft, rounded shape by years of patient use. The bread that was baked for breakfast, save for the slices already eaten, has been wrapped in clean linen cloths and stored in a wooden box upon the sideboard, where it will keep fresh for 2 or 3 days in the cool, dim air. The mother and her daughters now retire to the sitting room, that quieter chamber adjacent to the parlour where the textile work of the household is performed. The sitting room is smaller than the parlour, its proportions more intimate, its single window facing south and admitting the strong steady light that the women's work requires. The walls are whitewashed and bare of ornament, the floor is of pine boards polished by patient sweeping. The furniture is sparse but purposeful, a great wooden loom that occupies nearly half the room, a tall walking spinning wheel, a smaller flax wheel for finer threads, a long wooden bench, several chairs, a low table for the tools of mending and sewing, and along the eastern wall, a wooden chest of drawers in which the threads and yarns and small bolts of finished cloth are stored. The loom is the great patient creature of the room, a massive wooden frame perhaps 5 feet wide and 7 feet long, constructed of hand-hewn oak timbers that have darkened over its 60 years of use to the deep rich brown of strong tobacco. Its design is the traditional 4-harness counterbalance loom that the community has used for generations, its mechanisms of harness and treadle and beater all worked by foot and hand in a slow, steady choreography that the eldest daughter has been studying for the past 3 years. The loom's various warp threads are stretched in their long parallel ranks across the heddles and through the reed, perhaps 800 individual threads in all, each one a fine pale linen woven of the flax that was raised in the western fields and processed through its long patient stages of retting and breaking and scutching and hackling. The rhythm of the weaving is slow and meditative, perhaps 30 repetitions of the cycle in a single minute, each repetition adding its tiny increment to the slowly accumulating cloth. The sound is a soft musical sequence, the thump of the treadle, the whisper of the shed opening, the soft hiss of the shuttle passing, the gentle thump of the beater, and then the cycle beginning again. The eldest daughter's body has learned this rhythm so completely that she barely needs to think about it, her feet finding the treadles without conscious direction, her hands catching and releasing the shuttle in unbroken arcs, her mind free to drift through the patient meditative spaces that long handwork makes available. The mother, meanwhile, sits at the larger walking spinning wheel, that elegant tall wheel whose great drive wheel stands nearly 5 feet in diameter, whose flyer and bobbin are mounted upon a separate post, some 2 feet distant, whose entire mechanism is set in motion by the patient stepping back and forth of the spinner's feet upon the wide pine floorboards. She is spinning wool this morning, the fleece from one of the family sheep that was sheared in the late spring, washed in the spring house, carded into long soft rolls of pale cream-coloured fibre, and now drawn out into the fine even thread that her hands produce as if by quiet magic. The walking wheel is a thing of patient mechanical grace. The mother stands beside it, her right hand drawing the carded fibre upward and outward in a long steady motion, her left hand turning the great drive wheel by means of a small wooden peg set into its rim. The drive wheel turns, and the leather drive band that runs around its perimeter spins the smaller pulley of the flyer at perhaps 20 revolutions per single revolution of the great wheel, and the spinning flyer twists the fibre into thread as the mother draws it back. She steps backward several paces as the thread is drawn out, allowing the wheels spinning to insert the proper amount of twist, then steps forward again as she winds the newly spun thread onto the bobbin. This walking dance of the spinner has been performed by the women of this family for over a century. The same patient steps backward and forward, the same gentle drawing of fibre, the same quiet motion of the hand upon the wheel. The mother has spun perhaps 100 miles of thread in her long life, and each foot of that thread has passed through the patient cooperation of her hands and her feet, and the wheel and the carded fibre, and the slow inevitable transformation of formless fluff into orderly strand. The middle daughter sits at the smaller flax wheel, that more compact device with its smaller drive wheel and its seated position, used primarily for the finer threads required for the more delicate fabrics. She is spinning a fine linen thread from the carefully prepared flax fibres, her hands moving in a different rhythm than her mother's wool spinning, the linen requiring more precision in the drawing and a slightly different action of the fingers to produce the proper smooth yarn. Her concentration is intense, for the work is fine and the consequences of inattention immediate. A thread that breaks must be carefully spliced back into the yarn. A thread spun unevenly produces flaws in the eventual cloth. The youngest daughter, not yet trusted with the spinning wheels or the loom, sits upon the long bench by the southern window and works at her sampler, a square of unbleached linen, perhaps a foot across, upon which she is practicing the various embroidery stitches of the tradition, the cross-stitch, the satin stitch, the chain stitch, the running stitch, the small precise stitches that her hands must learn before she will be entrusted with any work that contributes to the household's actual needs. She is stitching the alphabet across the upper portion of her sampler, each letter formed in patient cross-stitches of dark blue cotton thread upon the pale linen ground, her tongue caught lightly between her teeth in the small concentration of childhood. The grandmother has joined them now, having descended from her bedchamber where she rested briefly after breakfast, and she sits in a rocking chair near the door, her hands working at a pair of knitting needles, the soft click-click of the needles adding its own quiet voice to the symphony of the room. The morning passes in this slow accumulating fashion, the men working their patient way across the lower meadow, the women weaving and spinning and stitching in the soft light of the sitting room, the youngest son carrying water and gathering kindling, and running occasional errands between the two centres of the household's work. The sun climbs steadily through the morning, its angle shifting from the sharp, slanted gold of dawn to the higher, cleaner light of late morning, the shadows on the yard shortening and reorienting themselves as the great patient timepiece of the heavens turns toward its noon. By 11 o'clock the lower meadow shows perhaps 2/3 of its area converted from standing grass into the smooth windrowed pattern of cut hay, the men's progress visible from a distance as a long pale gold rectangle expanding gradually across the green of the uncut. The father has paused twice during the morning to sharpen his scythe, drawing the small whetstone from the leather pouch at his belt and stroking it along the blade in the patient ritual that maintains the edge against the slow dulling of repeated use. Each sharpening takes perhaps 2 minutes, and during these brief pauses he stands with his hand upon his hip, surveying the meadow, gauging the progress, calculating the angle of the sun and the position of the breeze. By 11:30, the kitchen has begun its preparations for the midday meal, that substantial feast that is the largest meal of the working day. The mother has returned from the sitting room and now stands at the cook stove, where a great cast-iron pot simmers with the contents of the day's main dish, a stew of beef from the hindquarter of last autumn's slaughter. simmered with onions and carrots and turnips and small new potatoes from the garden, seasoned with salt and pepper and a single bay leaf and a small handful of fresh parsley from the kitchen garden. The stew has been cooking slowly since shortly after breakfast, its contents reducing into a rich brown gravy in which the vegetables have softened to the perfect register of yielding tenderness, its surface bearing the small constellations of golden fat that signal proper richness. A second pot upon the stove holds the day's bread, not the leavened wheat bread of the morning's table, but the slightly different cornmeal mush that often accompanies the midday meal, a substance made from yellow cornmeal ground at the local mill, mixed with cold water and salt, and stirred patiently into boiling water until it thickens into the smooth golden substance, whose name varies across the regions, but whose comforting solidity is the same across all the variations. The mush has cooked for perhaps half an hour upon the stove, stirred regularly by the eldest daughter to prevent any burning at the bottom of the pot, and it now sits at its perfect consistency, thick enough to hold its shape upon a spoon, but not so thick as to be stiff. A loaf of the morning's bread has been brought from the sideboard and placed upon a wooden cutting board, ready to be sliced. A jar of the strawberry preserves has been set upon the table beside the morning's wheat sheaf butter. A pitcher of cold buttermilk, fetched from the spring house by the youngest son just minutes ago, beads gently with condensation upon the wooden table. A pot of strong tea steeps quietly upon the back of the stove, its leaves gathered from the household's small reserve of imported black tea, a luxury used sparingly but never quite abandoned. At precisely 12 o'clock, the youngest son is sent to the lower meadow to summon the men to the meal. He runs across the yard with the easy bounding stride of a boy released briefly from his more sedate household tasks, his small straw hat held in his hand to keep it from being blown away, his bare feet finding the familiar path through the orchard and down the slope. He pauses at the edge of the meadow and calls out in his clear young voice that the meal is ready, and the father raises his hand in acknowledgement, drives the blade of his scythe carefully into the earth where it will stand upright until his return, and turns toward the house. The eldest son does the same. The younger son lays his rake gently upon the grass. The walk back from the meadow is unhurried, the men moving at the easy, patient pace that follows hard work, their conversation sparse and quiet, their faces darkened slightly by the morning sun, their shirts marked with the soft salt rings of dried sweat at the back and the underarms. They pause at the well pump in the yard to wash their hands and faces, the cold water running over their skin in a delicious shock of refreshment, and they remove their hats and run wet hands through their hair, smoothing it back from their foreheads. The midday meal is taken at the same long table where the morning's breakfast was served, but the gathering has now expanded to its full midday membership. The father and the 3 sons, the mother and the 3 daughters, the grandmother who has come from the sitting room, and one additional figure, the elderly uncle who lives in a small dawdy house, the grandfather house, attached to the main farmhouse, and who joins the family at most meals. The uncle is the father's elder brother, a man of perhaps 65 whose wife passed some years ago, and who has lived ever since in the quiet rhythm of widowhood within the embrace of his brother's household. He takes his place at the table with the easy familiarity of family, exchanges quiet nods with his nieces and nephews, and waits patiently for the silent grace that begins each meal. The grace passes in its accustomed silence, the family bowing their heads in unison, the silence so complete that one can hear the kettle's steady whisper and the distant cluck of a hen in the yard. The father raises his head, and the meal begins. The stew is ladled into the cream-coloured ironstone bowls in generous portions, the brown gravy steaming gently, the chunks of beef tender enough to be broken with the side of a spoon. The cornmeal mush is served beside it, a golden mound that gradually softens at its edges where the gravy seeps in. The bread is cut into thick slices and passed around. The butter, what remains of the morning's wheat sheaf, is spread upon the bread. The buttermilk is poured into the small earthenware cups, its surface beaded with the cool sweat of the spring house. The conversation at the midday table is more substantial than at breakfast, for the morning's work has produced observations and small reports that must be shared. The father describes the progress of the haying, the apparent quality of the cut grass, his estimate that the field will be finished by the day's end if the weather holds. The mother reports on the morning's spinning and weaving, mentions a small purchase of indigo dye that will be needed when the eldest daughter's current weaving project is complete. The grandmother offers a quiet observation about the apple orchard, having walked past it earlier in the morning, that the early apples are ripening more quickly than usual this year and may need to be picked within the week. The uncle nods at this and adds his own opinion that the cider press will need its bands tightened before the pressing season begins. The youngest son listens to all of this with the patient attentiveness of a child absorbing the texture of grown-up concerns, his spoon moving slowly between his bowl and his mouth, his face quietly absorbed. Across the table, his older sister gives him a small encouraging smile. The midday meal ends as it began, in the soft silence of the closing grace, and the family rises from the table in the same gentle hierarchy in which they arrived. The afternoon hours stretch before them, perhaps 4 hours of continued labour before the cooler evening tasks begin, and each member of the household returns to the work that the day requires. But before we follow them back into their afternoon, let us pause for a moment within the warm golden silence of the empty kitchen, after the dishes have been cleared, and the table wiped clean, and the family scattered once again to their various tasks. And let us consider, in the patient, unhurried manner that this farmhouse itself encourages, the philosophy of time that this place embodies. There is a quality of time upon this Pennsylvania farm that has very nearly vanished from the modern world, and it deserves careful contemplation, for it is among the most precious of the gifts that this gentle history can offer to those of us who listen from the far shores of a faster and more frantic age. Time here is not measured by the clock, though a clock does indeed tick patiently in the parlour. Time here is measured by the work and the seasons and the slow accumulating consequences of small daily acts. The mother does not bake the bread because the clock has reached 6 in the morning. She bakes the bread because the dough has risen, because the family will require bread, because this is the morning's work, and the morning has come. There is a profound dignity in this kind of time, and it produces a profound effect upon the human soul that lives within its embrace. The pace of the day is set by the body's natural rhythms, by the hunger that arrives at midday, by the weariness that gathers in the afternoon, by the deep restorative pull of sleep when the dark falls. The work itself unfolds in cycles that match the patience of growing things and the patience of weather. Hay is cut when the grass is ready, regardless of whether the calendar says it should be. Apples are picked when the apples are ripe. Bread is kneaded for as long as the dough requires. Children are taught when their hands are ready to learn. This way of inhabiting time produces a particular quality of attention that has become rare in the modern world. The eldest daughter, sitting at her loom, may pass 3 full hours in the patient repetition of her weaving rhythm, and during those 3 hours her mind may wander where it will, drifting through thoughts of the meadow, of her younger sister, of the small carved wooden bird that her grandfather made for her when she was 4 years old, of the prayer she will offer at the evening meal. There is no interruption, no demand for her attention to redirect itself. The work continues in its steady rhythm, requiring just enough of her body to keep her present in the room, leaving her mind free to roam through the inner gardens of memory and quiet reflection. The father, swinging his scythe through the long afternoon, experiences a similar quality of attentive inattention. The work requires his body, his arms and shoulders and back, his careful balance, his sense of the angle of the blade and the resistance of the grass. But it does not require the urgent foreground of his conscious mind, and so his thoughts are free to drift through the quiet rooms of his own contemplation, to reflect upon the well-being of his children, to remember his own father swinging this same scythe in the same field 40 years ago, to consider the small worries about the price of corn at the local market, and whether the new heifer will calve safely this autumn. This quality of work that occupies the body without demanding the foreground of the mind is one of the great quiet treasures of pre-industrial life, and it produces a particular kind of human being. The members of this household are not bored, though their days contain no entertainment in the modern sense. They are not anxious, though their lives contain real worries about weather and crops and illness and the slow accumulating uncertainties of farming. They are not exhausted, though their days contain hours of physical labor that would astonish most of their modern descendants. They are, instead, settled, present, attentive in a way that we have very nearly forgotten how to be. There is also in this farm a profound continuity with the past and with the future, a sense of being a single thread in a much longer weaving. The loom upon which the eldest daughter works was built by her great-grandfather. The scythe that the father swings was forged by a smith in the next valley 50 years ago. The recipe for the strawberry preserves was given to the mother by her own mother, who received it from her mother before her, in an unbroken chain that extends backward beyond the memory of the living. The walnut trees beneath which the lane curves were planted by an ancestor who never lived to sit beneath their shade. The whitewash upon the walls has been refreshed by hands that are dust now, and will be refreshed by hands not yet born. This sense of being held within a long continuity produces a quiet humility that is difficult to describe. The members of this household do not believe themselves to be the protagonists of any urgent historical drama. They do not imagine that their personal achievements will reshape the world. They understand themselves instead as caretakers, as the current keepers of a way of life that they did not invent and that they will not see ended. Their task is simply to maintain it, to add their small, careful contributions to the slow accumulating tradition, to teach their children what their parents taught them, to hand on the loom and the scythe and the recipe and the prayer covering and the patient knowledge of when the apples are ripe. In this humility there is a particular kind of peace that can be felt in every quiet corner of the farmhouse. It is the peace of those who do not need to prove themselves, who do not need to hurry, who do not need to imagine themselves into some larger or more dramatic life. They are precisely where they are meant to be, doing precisely what their ancestors did, in precisely the way it has always been done, and the doing of it is sufficient. This is not to suggest that the household is without sorrows or worries or small frictions. The mother sometimes wakes in the night with a quiet, anxious heart, considering the smaller children's coughs in the cold months. The father sometimes carries the silent weight of a poor harvest year, when the corn was thin and the prices were low. The eldest daughter sometimes feels the small private restlessness of young womanhood, looking out the sitting-room window toward roads she may never travel. These are the quiet sorrows of all human lives, and they exist here as everywhere, but they do not poison the days. They are held within the larger embrace of the continuity, the rhythm of the work, the patient unfolding of the seasons, and they pass through and onward in the way that all human griefs eventually pass. The kitchen is empty now, and golden, and the slanting afternoon light pours through the eastern window in soft, thick beams that illuminate the dust motes turning slowly in their patient, unhurried dance. The afternoon in its fullness is perhaps the longest stretch of unbroken time in the day's gentle architecture, the hours from 1 o'clock until 5 o'clock spreading themselves across the slow turning of the sun in a single sustained meditation of work and quiet light. The family has scattered once again to their various tasks. The men have returned to the lower meadow, where the cutting continues toward its eventual completion. The mother has resumed her spinning at the great walking wheel. The eldest daughter has taken up her weaving once again. The middle daughter has set aside her flax wheel and now sits at the long table mending a torn apron with patient, careful stitches. The youngest daughter has finished her sampler practice and now helps her grandmother at the kitchen sink, the two of them slowly working through a bushel of green beans that must be snapped and prepared for the evening's preserving. The youngest son has been given the task of carrying water to the men in the meadow, a small wooden cask of cool water from the well being heavy enough to require both his small hands, but light enough to be manageable for several trips across the course of the afternoon. He sets out from the house at 1:30 with his cask, the water sloshing gently within, the wood of the cask still slightly damp from its rinsing, his small straw hat firmly upon his head against the strengthening sun. He walks down the orchard path with the patient, careful gait of a child carrying something important, his eyes on the path before him, his small lips moving slightly as he counts his steps in the private way that children sometimes do. The orchard through which he passes is a thing of slow, patient beauty in its mid-afternoon stillness. The apple trees standing in their long rows with their patient dark trunks and their full green canopies, the small green apples beginning to swell upon the branches but still many weeks away from their autumn ripeness. The grass beneath the trees has been allowed to grow longer than the grass of the lawn, and small wildflowers bloom in soft mingled colours among the green, the white lace of yarrow, the pale yellow of buttercups, the soft purple of self-heal, the bright orange of the occasional butterfly weed where the orchard borders the meadow. A cat moves through the orchard, an old black and white barn cat whose responsibilities include keeping the granary free of mice, and who in this hour pursues those responsibilities with the indolent grace of an experienced professional. The cat pauses to consider the youngest son passing through her orchard, decides that he is not interesting enough to warrant attention, and continues on her own slow patient path through the longer grass. The afternoon sun has climbed to its greatest height, and now begins its slow patient descent toward the western horizon, but its angle in mid-afternoon is still high enough to throw the shadows quite short upon the ground. The light is the strongest and clearest of the entire day, a pure golden-white quality that brings every detail of the landscape into sharp definition, every blade of grass casting its small precise shadow, every leaf on every tree showing its individual texture, every ripple of the small stream that runs along the eastern border of the lower meadow catching the light in countless tiny points of brightness. The weather, however, has begun to change in subtle ways that the father has been monitoring throughout the afternoon. The bank of clouds that he noticed this morning low upon the western horizon has slowly grown and risen, and now, at perhaps 2:30, the clouds have climbed to roughly halfway up the western sky, their forms shifting from the soft flat layers of the morning into the slightly more towered architecture of building afternoon clouds. The father pauses in his cutting, leans upon his scythe, and studies the western sky for several long unhurried moments, gauging the speed of the cloud movement, the direction of the upper air, the temperature and humidity of the breeze upon his face. He calls across the meadow to his elder son, his voice carrying clearly in the still afternoon air, that they should perhaps hurry their final cutting somewhat, for the rain that he predicted this morning may arrive earlier than he initially thought. The elder son nods his understanding and increases the cadence of his own scythe work, the swing of the blade now slightly faster, the footfalls forward slightly quicker, but the rhythm itself maintained in its essential character. The younger son, raking behind, also picks up his pace, his small arms working with greater urgency. The afternoon now carries a small undertone of weather watching that adds a quiet intensity to the work. The father glances westward every few minutes, gauging the progress of the building clouds. The mother, glancing out the sitting room window, also notes the changing sky and considers whether the laundry that hangs upon the long line in the side yard should be brought in immediately, or whether there is yet enough time for it to finish its drying. She decides upon the latter for now, but resolves to check again within the hour. The clouds continue their slow patient growth, and by 3 o'clock they have climbed to perhaps 2/3 of the way up the western sky, their lower portions taking on the slightly darker grey that signals real moisture, their upper edges still bright white where they catch the sun. The breeze has shifted slightly, now coming more from the west and southwest, and it carries within it a faint cool note that suggests rain is indeed gathering somewhere in the high air. The youngest son has made his second trip to the meadow with the water cask, has watched his father and brothers drink in long grateful pulls from the wooden dipper, has been told gently to bring the cask back full one more time, and then to remain at the house, for the cutting is now hurrying toward its conclusion, and he should not be in the meadow when the rain begins. The mother, at 3:30, decides that the laundry must indeed come in. She summons the youngest daughter and the middle daughter, and the three of them go out to the side yard where the long rope line stretches between 2 cedar posts, hung with the morning's washing, bed-sheets pale and smooth, the men's working shirts, several aprons, the daughters' undergarments, a row of small handkerchiefs, and the youngest son's spare shirt and trousers. The clothes have dried perfectly in the strong afternoon sun, and they come down from the line crisp and warm and smelling of sunshine, and the faint clean note of the lye soap that washed them. The work of bringing in the laundry is performed with the cheerful efficiency of 3 women who have done this work together 1,000 times, each garment unpinned and folded into the wicker basket with smooth, practiced gestures, the wooden clothespin slipped into the apron pocket of the youngest daughter who is responsible for their collection, the line slowly emptying itself as the basket fills. By 4 o'clock, the meadow has been entirely cut, the last patient strokes of the scythes completing the long pale gold rectangle of windrowed hay. The men gather their tools, the father wiping his blade clean with a handful of grass, the eldest son doing the same with his own scythe, the younger son shouldering his rake. They walk back across the orchard toward the house, at a pace slightly quicker than their morning's setting out, but still calm, still unhurried, for the work has been completed, and the rain, when it comes, will come upon a fully cut meadow whose hay can be raked into haycocks tomorrow if the morning is dry. The first cool gust of the approaching weather lifts the wide brim of the father's hat, and he glances upward with a small quiet smile of professional satisfaction. The rain begins at perhaps 4:20, gentle at first, a light cooling drizzle that hisses softly against the leaves of the orchard and patters with quiet rhythm upon the cedar shingles of the roof. The men have just reached the equipment shed, their tools deposited upon their proper pegs, their hats hung upon the wooden hooks beside the door. They stand for a moment in the open doorway of the shed, watching the rain come down across the yard, breathing the suddenly altered air, smelling that incomparable scent that rain releases from warm summer earth, that mineral green fragrance that seems to hold within it the entire memory of stone and root and growing thing. The rain strengthens gradually, its drops becoming heavier, its rhythm intensifying into a steady persistent percussion upon the yard and the roof and the patient leaves of the trees. It is not a violent rain, not a thunderstorm, only a substantial steady summer shower of the kind that often gathers across these Pennsylvania afternoons, and the family understands at once that it will likely fall for an hour, or perhaps two, before passing on toward the east and leaving the evening clean and cool behind it. The men cross the yard at a measured run, their shirts darkening with raindrops, their boots splashing through the small puddles already forming in the wagon ruts of the lane. They reach the kitchen door, stamp their feet upon the blue stone threshold, and step into the wash porch, where they remove their wet outer shirts and hang them upon the wooden pegs to dry. The mother has heard their arrival and meets them at the inner door with a small stack of clean dry towels, and they wipe their faces and arms and run the towels through their damp hair before stepping into the kitchen proper. The kitchen has become, in the last 20 minutes, a place of even greater warmth and welcome than usual. The mother has added a fresh log to the cook stove, and its heat now radiates strongly through the room, drying the air, drawing out the comfortable scent of the wood and the iron and the slow simmering of the evening stew that has begun its long cooking upon the back burner. The kettle on the front burner is whispering a steady plume of steam, and a fresh pot of strong tea has been brewed and set to steep upon the warming shelf. The family gathers slowly, drawn by the rain and the warmth and the patient gravity of the kitchen, into the room together. The eldest daughter has come from her loom, the middle daughter from her mending, the youngest daughter from her grandmother's side at the kitchen sink. The grandmother herself has settled into the rocking chair beside the cook stove, her knitting once again in her hands, the soft click-click of her needles adding its steady voice to the murmuring symphony of rain and stove and kettle. The youngest son sits cross-legged upon the rag rug at the grandmother's feet, watching the rain through the kitchen window and listening to her quiet humming of an old hymn, whose words she no longer fully remembers but whose melody has been within her since girlhood. The father takes a mug of tea from the mother's hand and seats himself at the kitchen table, where he sips slowly and watches the steam rise from the surface of the dark liquid. The eldest son joins him a moment later with his own mug, and they sit together in the comfortable, companionable silence of two men who have completed a substantial work, and who now permit themselves the small reward of warm tea and dry clothing, and the gentle music of rain upon a sound roof. The conversation that emerges over the next half hour is sparse and gentle, the small accumulating observations of the day shared in soft tones across the kitchen. The father remarks that the meadow was completed in good time, and that if the next day is dry, the haycocks can be made and the hay brought into the barn within another 2 days. The mother mentions that the bean snapping is nearly finished, and that she will begin the canning of the green beans tomorrow morning, a task that will require the eldest daughter's help and likely the middle daughter's assistance as well. The grandmother, looking up from her knitting, observes that the rain is exactly what the corn needed, and that the field beyond the orchard will be much improved by the morning. The eldest son mentions that he noticed a small loose board upon the eastern wall of the chicken coop, and that he will repair it tomorrow before the hens begin their afternoon rambles. The afternoon settles into evening by patient degrees. The light through the windows shifts from the bright gold of mid-afternoon to the softer, warmer gold of late afternoon, to the deep amber of approaching evening. The rain continues its steady, patient music upon the roof, and the kitchen grows ever warmer and more enveloping. a small island of golden lamplight and quiet conversation within the larger gentleness of the falling rain. The mother begins the preparations for the evening meal. The stew that has been simmering all afternoon is now thick and rich, its meat tender to the touch of a fork, its vegetables yielding and full of the deep flavor of long, slow cooking. She tastes it carefully from a wooden spoon, adds a small additional pinch of salt, stirs it once more, and adjusts the damper of the stove to maintain its perfect simmer. A second pot, smaller, contains the evening's potatoes, scrubbed and quartered, and now boiling gently in their own salted water. A third small pot holds a sauce of the early apples that the grandmother mentioned at the midday table. Apple sauce simmered with sugar and a small piece of cinnamon stick, its sweet, warm fragrance now mingling with the savoury depth of the stew. The eldest daughter, having completed her current section of weaving, has come into the kitchen to help with the meal preparations. She slices the second loaf of the morning's bread, sets out the plates and cups, fills the pitcher with cold water from the well, and arranges everything upon the table with the same patient precision that her younger sister demonstrated at breakfast. The middle daughter mashes the cooked potatoes in a large wooden bowl, adding fresh butter from the morning's churning and a generous splash of warm cream from the pitcher in the springhouse, beating the mixture with a wooden masher until it is smooth and pale gold and steaming. The rain begins to ease at perhaps 5:45, its rhythm slowing from the steady persistent drum to a softer scattered patter, and by 6 o'clock it has passed entirely, leaving behind it the cool, clean air and the slowly clearing sky and the low golden light of an evening that has been washed clean of all summer dust. The family gathers at the table for the evening meal as the last raindrops fall from the eaves, and the silent grace is offered, and the meal begins. The evening meal is somewhat lighter than the midday meal, in the sensible tradition of farming families everywhere. The heavy main meal taken at the height of the day's work, and the evening meal serving more as a comfortable closing of the day's eating. The stew is generous nonetheless, and the mashed potatoes are heaped warm upon each plate, and the bread is buttered, and the applesauce is spooned into the small earthenware bowls, and the conversation circles slowly through the day's small accumulated reports and observations, and the gentle considerations of tomorrow's work. The kitchen lamp has been lit against the gathering dusk, and its soft yellow light fills the room with the warmth of an old, well-loved evening. The evening meal ends with the same patient unhurriedness as all the day's meals, the family lingering somewhat longer at the table than they did at midday, the warmth of the kitchen and the comfort of the closed and rain-cleaned day producing a quality of peaceful satiation that no one wishes to disturb too quickly. The father pours himself a second mug of tea and sips it slowly, his elbows on the table in a posture that is permitted at this evening hour, though it would not be at the more formal noon meal. The grandmother dabs delicately at her lips with a small folded cloth and sets it beside her plate. The youngest son, having finished his applesauce, runs his finger around the inside of his small bowl to gather the last sweet remains, and his mother does not correct him. The dishes are eventually cleared and washed, this evening's washing handled by the eldest daughter and the middle daughter together, their hands moving in the smooth practice choreography of work performed together for many years, one washing in the hot soapy water, the other rinsing in the cold clear water and stacking the dishes upon the wooden drainboard. The youngest daughter dries each dish with a clean linen towel and returns it to its proper place upon the shelf, her movements careful and precise, her tongue caught lightly between her teeth in the small concentration that all her household tasks require. The father, the mother, and the grandmother retire to the parlour, where the small wood-burning stove has been lit against the cool evening that has followed the rain, its fire small but steady, its warmth gathering pleasantly in the quiet room. The father settles into his rocking chair and takes up the family Bible from the small round table, opening it to the place marked by the faded blue silk ribbon, the passage in the book of Proverbs where some long ago reading was interrupted. The mother takes her place in her own rocking chair and unfolds a small piece of mending that has waited for this hour, a torn collar of one of the middle daughter's dresses that requires a careful patch. The grandmother sits in the third rocking chair, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes half closed, her face composed in the deep peace of evening. She does not always read or sew or knit during these hours after supper. Sometimes she simply sits, allowing her thoughts to drift through the long galleries of her memory, revisiting the rooms of her own girlhood, the faces of the people she has loved and lost, the small accumulated images of 73 years of patient living. Tonight she is in such a quiet mood, and her grown son and his wife understand this and respect it, working at their own quiet activities without disturbing her contemplation. The two sons have gone outside to the barn to perform the evening chores, the milking of the cows for the second time of the day, the feeding of the horses, the closing of the chicken coop against the foxes that prowl the perimeter of the farm at night. Their work this evening is performed in the soft, cool air of the post-rain twilight, the western sky still glowing with a faint lavender afterlight, the eastern sky already deepening toward the dark blue of true night. The first stars beginning to emerge in tiny silver pinpoints high above the silhouettes of the walnut trees. The youngest son has joined the grandmother in the parlour, not to interrupt her quiet reflection, but to sit upon the rag rug at her feet and watch the small flickering fire within the parlour stove. He has brought with him his 3 river stones, the smooth small treasures he keeps upon the shelf above his bed, and he turns them slowly in his small hands, feeling their familiar weight, their patient cool surfaces, the tiny variations of texture that distinguish each one from its companions. The fire in the stove flickers softly through the small grate of the firebox, casting its gentle dancing patterns upon the wall and the ceiling, and the boy watches the patterns with the patient absorption of a child who has not yet been taught that staring at fire is something one might find boring. The 2 daughters who have finished the dishes now join the parlour company, the eldest daughter bringing her current knitting project, a pair of stockings for her younger brother that must be finished before the autumn cold arrives. The middle daughter carrying her embroidery hoop on which she works at a small floral border for a pillowcase that will be a wedding gift for a cousin in the next valley. They settle upon the long settle bench, side by side, their hands working in the soft amber lamplight, their occasional whispered comments to each other adding a thread of quiet feminine companionship to the larger silence of the room. The father reads aloud from the Bible, his voice low and steady, the cadences of the old translation falling naturally into his speech in the way of a man who has heard and read these words his entire life. The passage tonight is a chapter of Proverbs, and the family listens in respectful attention, the words of accumulated wisdom moving through the room like a gentle current. The reading takes perhaps 15 minutes, and when it ends, the father closes the book softly and replaces the silk ribbon at the next chapter for tomorrow evening's reading. The 2 sons return from their barn chores, washing at the kitchen pump before joining the family in the parlour. The eldest son takes a chair by the window and reads quietly from a book of agricultural advice that he has borrowed from the lending shelf at the township school. The younger son sits beside the youngest brother on the rug and helps him examine the river stones, finding small variations of colour and texture that the young boy had not previously noticed. The hours pass in this gentle assembled quiet, each member of the family present in the same room, but each engaged in their own small activity, the silence broken only by the soft click of knitting needles, the gentle whisper of pages turning, the murmur of an occasional brief comment exchanged between 2 siblings, the patient ticking of the mantel clock upon its shelf, the soft whisper of the small fire within the parlour stove. The lamp upon the round table casts its warm circle of golden light upon the room, and the corners of the parlour recede into a soft umber dimness that gathers more and more deeply as the night outside becomes truly dark. By 9 o'clock, the youngest son has fallen asleep upon the rug at the grandmother's feet, his small head resting upon his folded arm, his 3 river stones clutched gently in his small fist. The mother rises quietly and gathers him into her arms, his weight surprisingly substantial in the way of sleeping children, and she carries him up the staircase to his small chamber beneath the western eaves, where she lays him gently upon his bed, removes his small leather shoes, draws the patchwork quilt up to his chin, and stands for a moment in the dim light from the hallway, watching his peaceful sleeping face. The hour grows late by the gentle measures of farming time, and one by one the members of the family begin to make their slow, soft preparations for sleep. The middle daughter is the next to rise, setting aside her embroidery hoop with a small quiet sigh of satisfaction at the day's work completed, kissing her grandmother softly upon the forehead, exchanging a quiet good night with her parents, and ascending the staircase to her shared chamber. Her footsteps upon the worn pine treads are soft and unhurried, and the sound of them recedes into the upper hallway, and then is gone. The grandmother rises next, her movements slow and careful in the way of one whose body has accumulated the weight of 73 winters. She gathers her small bundle of knitting and tucks it into the wicker basket beside her chair. She kisses each member of the remaining family in turn, brief, soft kisses upon each forehead, murmuring a quiet blessing in the old dialect that the family has spoken at home for generations. Then she retires to her small bedchamber upon the ground floor, the chamber that was once a pantry but was converted years ago when her knees began to find the staircase too difficult. The eldest daughter follows perhaps 10 minutes later, her stocking knitting completed for the evening, the half-finished sock tucked carefully into her work basket. She too kisses her parents and moves up the staircase in soft footfalls. The eldest son and the younger son go up shortly after, the eldest carrying the agricultural book he has been reading, the younger carrying nothing but his own quiet weariness, the two of them ascending together in the easy companionable silence of brothers. Only the father and the mother remain in the parlour now, sitting in their twin rocking chairs, the small fire in the parlour stove burning down toward its last patient embers, the lamp upon the round table casting its softer, dimmer light as the oil in its reservoir slowly diminishes. They do not immediately rise. They sit together for perhaps another 20 minutes, in the gentle silence that has been the medium of their long marriage, occasionally exchanging a quiet word about some small matter, but mostly simply sitting in each other's familiar presence. Two people who have shared this same evening room for 30 consecutive years and who find nothing more to say at the close of any particular day because everything has already been said many times in the course of their patient long lives together. The father at last rises, banks the fire in the parlour stove with a careful arrangement of the remaining embers, closes the damper to its night setting, and turns down the wick of the lamp until its flame is the smallest possible thread of yellow light. The mother gathers her mending and tucks it into her work basket. They climb the staircase together, the father going first with the lamp held high to light their way, the mother following with one hand upon the banister. They pause at the top of the staircase to listen briefly to the quiet of the upper floor, the small soft sounds of breathing from the various bedchambers, the slight creak of a bed frame as one of the daughters shifts in her sleep, the distant, patient sound of the wind that has risen slightly in the late evening, moving through the leaves of the great walnut trees outside. They continue down the hallway to their own bedchamber where the lamp is set upon the washstand and the patient evening rituals of preparation for sleep begin their slow unfolding. The mother removes her white prayer covering and lays it carefully upon the chest of drawers where it will rest until the morning. She unties her apron and folds it precisely upon the wooden chair beside the bed. She removes her plain navy dress and hangs it upon its peg. In her long white nightgown, she sits upon the edge of the bed and unbinds her hair from the simple coil in which it has been pinned all day, and her hair falls down across her shoulders in a long pale river that catches the soft lamplight in tiny shifting gleams. She brushes it slowly, with a wooden brush that her own mother used before her, the rhythm of the brushing meditative and gentle, perhaps 50 long careful strokes from the crown of her head down to the small of her back. The father meanwhile has performed his own evening preparations. He has removed his work clothes and hung them upon their pegs. He has washed his face and hands once more at the basin. He has put on the long white nightshirt that is the customary sleeping garment of the men of the community. He has pulled back the patchwork quilt and the homespun linen sheets, exposing the pale soft surface of the down mattress that awaits them. When the mother has finished brushing her hair, she braids it loosely into a single long plait that falls over her shoulder, and she joins her husband in the bed. The father reaches across to the lamp upon the washstand and turns its wick down to its complete extinguishing, and the chamber drops into a soft warm darkness illuminated only by the faint rectangle of the window where the moon has now risen above the eastern horizon and casts its silver light across the orchard. They lie together in the quiet darkness, not yet asleep but settling toward sleep, and the prayers of the evening are murmured softly in the dialect of their childhood. Brief, simple thanksgivings for the day's safe completion, gentle requests for the safe keeping of all those whom they love, ancient phrases that have been spoken in this exact form by this exact family, in this exact bed for generations beyond memory. The prayers end with a soft mutual amen, and they turn slightly toward each other as they have turned for 30 years, and the breath of each becomes slowly slower and deeper, and the sleep that has been gathering at the edges of the day moves now into the center. The house itself is settling into its nighttime stillness. The various small sounds of the day have ceased. The kettle no longer whispers upon the stove, for the fire has been banked down to its overnight embers. The clock in the parlour still ticks, but its sound is now perhaps the only audible thing within the entire house, a small patient pulse beating slowly through the dark wooden corridors. Outside, the night has reached its full deep blue, and the stars have emerged in their patient countless multitudes, scattered across the sky in patterns that are unchanged from the patterns that the first inhabitants of these Pennsylvania hills looked up to see 2 centuries ago. A soft wind moves through the orchard, gently rustling the leaves of the apple trees. A distant owl calls once, and is answered some moments later by another owl perhaps a quarter-mile away, the two voices exchanging their slow inquiry across the dark fields. A small fox passes through the lower meadow, picking her careful way among the windrows of cut hay, her body a soft moving shadow against the silvered grass. The night deepens and deepens, and the great patient quiet of the farmhouse settles ever more profoundly into its hours of rest. The moon climbs higher in the eastern sky, its silver light moving slowly across the orchard and the yard and the long pale rectangles of the windows, the patient progress of its illumination tracing the slow turning of the earth toward its midnight. The clock in the parlour strikes once for 10, and then again some time later, a single soft chime for 10:30, the small bronze sound carrying through the house and dissipating into the wooden silences of the corridors and the upper rooms. You yourself, dear listener, are also drifting now, drifting gently as the family drifts, your breath slow and even, your shoulders soft and yielding into the cushions beneath you, the day's remaining tensions melting like the last frost beneath a patient morning sun. There is nothing more required of you now. There is nothing to remember, nothing to plan, nothing to hold on to. The story has settled, the family has settled, the farmhouse has settled, and you may settle too into the deep and patient quiet of this soft summer night 2 centuries ago. The house breathes around you in its quiet nighttime rhythm. The timbers settle gently as the warmth of the day slowly releases itself. The boards of the floor expand and contract in their imperceptible nightly movements. The roof shingles catch the moonlight upon their patient grey surfaces. The chimney rises in its solid silhouette against the star-filled sky. All is well, all is quiet, all is held within the great gentle embrace of the night. Outside, the meadows stretch away in their long pale rectangles, the cut hay of the lower meadow lying in its smooth windrows, the standing grass of the upper meadow swaying gently in the soft night wind. The orchard stands in its patient ranks of trees, the small apples beginning to swell upon the branches, the leaves whispering their gentle nocturne to one another. The garden sleeps within its low cedar fence, the bean plants climbing their tripods even in their nightly rest, the tomato vines holding their ripening fruits, the herbs releasing their faint sweet fragrances into the cool night air. The spring house stands in its small stone solidity over the patient flowing spring, the cold water moving quietly across the slate slabs, the crocks of butter and the pitchers of milk resting in their submerged peace, the temperature within unchanging through all the variations of the outside world. The barn stands tall and dark against the silver sky, its vertical pine boards catching the moonlight in long soft patterns, its great sliding door closed against the night, its inhabitants resting within in their warm bovine and equine peace. You drift further and further now, dear listener, your body settling more and more deeply into the quiet of this remembered farmhouse night. The patient ticking of the parlour clock continues its slow, soft pulse. The rustling of the orchard leaves continues its gentle, endless music. The soft creaking of the timbers continues its barely audible song. The breath of the sleeping house continues its slow, eternal rhythm. There is nothing now to think about. There is nothing now to remember. There is nothing now to do. There is only the patient settling, the gentle sinking, the slow, soft drift into the deep, sweet country of sleep. The farmhouse holds you, the night holds the farmhouse, the stars hold the night, and something larger and gentler than any of these holds the stars in their patient, turning across the vast sky. Sleep now, dear listener. Sleep as the family sleeps. Sleep as the cows sleep in their warm barn. Sleep as the apples sleep upon their branches. Sleep as the river stones sleep in the small boy's hand, sleep as the meadows sleep beneath the silver moon. Sleep as the patient hills of Pennsylvania sleep in their long gentle continuity. The night is long, the night is kind. The night will hold you safely until the morning, when somewhere far away in another time, the eastern sky will once again begin to deepen toward rose, and the kettle will once again begin to whisper upon the stove, and a mother will once again descend the worn wooden treads of a staircase in her soft stockinged feet. But that is many hours away. That is for the morning, that is for another time entirely. For now, there is only this, the soft, warm quilt, the deep-down mattress, the silver moonlight upon the window pane, the patient breathing of the gentle house, the slow turning of the patient stars, and the long sweet drift, deeper and deeper, into the welcoming country of dream. Sleep now. Sleep deeply. Sleep well. The night holds you. The story is done. Sleep. Welcome to Sleepy History with Henry. Here, we harness AI to breathe new life into authentic historical records, creating an immersive auditory experience. This entire production is AI-assisted, crafted solely for relaxation and sleep support. TAND is not a substitute for professional medical advice. Please do not listen while driving or operating machinery. Now, let Henry and AI guide you on a peaceful journey through the past.